14 youths vanished from Sacred Heart Orphanage in Pennsylvania between 1862 and 1865. Not sent for adoption or moved elsewhere, they simply evaporated from all official logs as though they never existed. Soon, local Protestant households were observed with Irish Catholic youths tilling their soil, children marked by the distinct calluses of orphanage life who spoke with heavy Gaelic lilts. When challenged, these families provided conflicting excuses. Recently unearthed correspondence between the Mother Superior and the Bishop of Philadelphia exposes a gruesome reality. These children weren't lost, they were sold. Before we dive into the mystery of Sacred Heart, remember that this channel is for those with the grit to face the darkest shadows of America's history. If you are prepared to reveal the truths that powerful groups have tried to suppress, subscribe and hit the bell. I want to hear from you. Comment with the state you are watching from. Do you have the stomach to learn the true fate of those 14 innocent souls? Let us find out. The reality behind the missing residents of Sacred Heart starts not with their departure, but with the grim conditions that led them to the Pennsylvania countryside. Lancaster County in 1862 was a land of both wealth and deep-seated bigotry. The fertile soil grew the grain that sustained Union troops in the Civil War, bringing massive riches to Protestant German and English landowners. Yet this wealth brought a crisis. With young men away at the front, farms lacked the muscle required for the planting and reaping seasons. The labor drought turned dire just as military contracts promised vast fortunes to anyone who could deliver. Into this mix of greed and necessity came Sacred Heart Orphanage, founded in 1859 by the Philadelphia Sisters of Mercy. The three-story brick structure stood on 40 acres near Strasburg, its Gothic architecture rising like a Catholic monument among the modest Protestant chapels and Lutheran meeting houses. Its pointed windows and high bell tower were impossible for the neighbors to ignore, sparking unease among the locals. Mother Superior Catherine O'Malley, a sharp-witted woman of 45, had come from County Cork 2 decades prior with nothing but iron will and faith. She carried the melodic accent of Ireland, but her financial instincts were purely American. Under her command, Sacred Heart expanded from 12 children to nearly 60 by 1862. The home took in Irish Catholic youths from Philadelphia's teeming slums and the orphans of immigrants killed, while laying the Pennsylvania Railroad through the western mountains. The children, aged 5 to 16, bore the pale skin of indoor life and the weary eyes of those who knew the world was a harsh place. They were dressed in uniform gray wool, plain dresses for girls and simple trousers for boys, and prayed daily in the small chapel. The older ones helped cook, scrub, and manage the gardens that kept them fed. Sister Agnes Flanagan, the treasurer and O'Malley's confidant, tracked every cent in the orphanage's accounts. Her ledgers, written in precise script, recorded the brutal fight to keep the doors open. While the diocese provided some help, Catholic donors were rare in that part of the state, and the war had choked off charity. By 1862, Sacred Heart was drowning in debt, a reality that haunted Mother O'Malley's nights. The local Protestants viewed the home with a suspicion that bordered on hatred. The Know Nothing movement had ignited anti-Catholic rage across the state in the 1850s, and the war did little to cool those fires. Protestant preachers warned of popish corruption, and newspapers ran letters venting about foreign children loyal only to Rome. Some farmers refused to sell to the orphanage, while others hiked the prices for basic supplies. Into this powder keg of religious bile and money trouble stepped Father Michael Brennan in the spring of 1862. Sent by the diocese to act as chaplain, he was also tasked with fixing the financial ruin. Brennan was a new breed of priest, ambitious, smooth-tongued, and possessing a merchant's eye for profit. Unlike the older Irish clerics before him, Brennan was a Philadelphia native who understood how to balance holy vows with American survival. At 38, Father Brennan was a striking figure in his black robes, his hair perfectly set, and his boots shined to a mirror finish. He spoke with a polished local accent, and had a knack for making both Catholics and Protestants feel at ease. The local ministers found him surprisingly sensible, and the wealthy farmers realized he understood their desperate need for field hands. What stayed hidden was that Brennan's understanding was actually a plan. He saw a gold mine where others saw a charity, and he began crafting a solution that favored everyone except the orphans. The first hint of this shift came in late May 1862, when O'Malley told the staff that older children would be sent to local farms to help with the spring work. This wasn't unheard of. Orphanages often placed youths as servants. But Sister Agnes saw that these deals were made personally by Brennan, bypassing the diocese's standard rules. When she asked for the files, Brennan claimed he was doing the paperwork himself to save the busy administrators the trouble. The morning of June 15, 1862, broke with heavy humidity and storm clouds over the Susquehanna. Timothy Walsh, a 14-year-old who had been at the home for 3 years, was gardening when Brennan approached with a well-to-do Protestant named Ezra Hoffman, a rich wheat farmer. Timothy had been waiting for this. Brennan had told him he'd be working for a good family who would pay wages to help save the orphanage. The boy was eager. He'd seen O'Malley's stressed face and heard the whispers about unpaid debts. If his labor could save Sacred Heart, he was ready. Hoffman inspected Timothy like he was buying a horse, checking for hand calluses, making him lift grain bags, and asking about his knowledge of livestock. Satisfied, Hoffman gave Brennan $45 in gold, a staggering amount for the time. "The lad stays through harvest," Hoffman said in his thick Pennsylvania Dutch accent. "He'll sleep in the loft with the hands, and I'll return him in November." Brennan blessed the boy, telling him he was serving both God and the Union by helping feed the troops. Sister Agnes watched from the window as Timothy drove off in Hoffman's wagon, feeling a sense of dread she couldn't quite explain. It might have been the alarming speed of the transactions, or perhaps the curious detail that Hoffman settled the debt in gold coins rather than the standard wartime paper bills. Yet, because Father Brennan appeared so self-assured, and Mother O'Malley had given her blessing, Sister Agnes stifled her intuition and returned to her bookkeeping. Just 72 hours later, 16-year-old Margaret Connolly vanished under nearly identical conditions. She was claimed by Mrs. Sarah Zimmerman, a wealthy farmer's wife, under the pretext of serving as a domestic maid and helping manage the Zimmermans' infant twins. Margaret was an intelligent girl with a talent for linguistics. She spoke the Pennsylvania Dutch dialect learned from urban immigrants and understood enough Latin to assist during the liturgy. Mrs. Zimmerman provided $60 for Margaret's placement, claiming a desperate need for a replacement after her previous girl fled to a city munitions plant. This cycle persisted through the hot months of 1862. Every few weeks, Father Brennan would arrive with a new patron, unfailingly Protestant, affluent, and in immediate need of labor. The price for these servants rose as the harvest neared and the worker shortage intensified. 13-year-old Patrick Murphy was handed over to a Lancaster shopkeeper for $50. 15-year-old Bridget O'Brien was sent to a banker's home in Columbia for $75. Even young 12-year-old Sean McMahon was taken by a mill owner who insisted he required a boy for his stables. By the arrival of September, 8 youths had been transferred to Protestant estates, and the orphanage's ledger looked healthier than it had in years. The facility was finally out of the red, able to buy thick winter cloaks for the remaining orphans, and even begin constructing a small wing to house more arrivals from the city. Mother O'Malley celebrated Brennan's talent for finding homes for the older wards, and the Sisters of Mercy began to feel a sense of security about the home's longevity. However, Sister Agnes remained haunted by the silence. She realized that not a single one of the placed children had sent word back to Strasbourg, a sharp departure from the past when former residents regularly wrote to their friends and mentors. More alarming still was her attempt to visit Timothy at the Hoffman estate. She was blocked at the entrance and told the boy was far too busy with the reaping to see guests. The situation reached a crisis point on a freezing October morning when Agnes ran into Mrs. Hoffman at the local market. While the woman was stocking up on house supplies, Agnes approached her to inquire after Timothy's health. Mrs. Hoffman appeared bewildered, claiming she had no knowledge of any such boy. She stated flatly that her husband had never taken in any Sacred Heart orphans, and that their field hands were all local men who had avoided the draft due to their vital farm work. When Agnes insisted, the woman grew flustered and suggested Agnes was mistaken about the destination. But the sister was positive she had watched Timothy drive away in Ezra Hoffman's wagon, and she had Brennan's own confirmation of the location. The pieces simply didn't fit unless a deception was at play. That night, Agnes cornered Father Brennan in his small study. She demanded clarity regarding Timothy and the others, insisting on reviewing the signed contracts for their placements. Brennan initially tried to laugh it off, suggesting she had simply misinterpreted a confused woman's remarks. But when Agnes threatened to escalate the matter to the bishop, Brennan's charm evaporated, replaced by a gaze of ice. "Sister Agnes," he whispered, "you must realize we are living in a time of great upheaval. The conflict has opened doors that we, as faithful Catholics, must walk through for the survival of our mission. Those youths are in good hands, and their contribution ensures that Sacred Heart endures." Agnes fired back. "What contribution? What have you truly done with them?" Brennan leaned back, pressing his fingertips together as he weighed his response. He claimed he had secured them futures where they could aid the war effort and learn trades from wealthy families, who in turn provided donations that stabilized the orphanage. He dismissed Mrs. Hoffman's denial as a necessary lie to protect the family's privacy, insisting that confidentiality was paramount during the war. Agnes felt a coldness deeper than the autumn air. "Father, are you admitting you have sold these children?" The accusation hung heavy and toxic. Brennan's eyes turned into slits as he delivered a clear warning. She could either remain a silent, obedient servant of the order or pursue a path that would destroy the institution and everyone associated with it. He reminded her that the bishop had sent him to fix their problems, and he had done so. The following winter was marked by a suffocating silence within the walls of Sacred Heart. Agnes continued her financial duties, but the passion for her vocation had withered. She began dissecting the books with a cynical eye, spotting trends she had previously ignored. The miraculous funds from the summer all originated from a single, vague category labeled placement services, which synced perfectly with the dates the children were taken. She finally grasped the dark reality. This was not charity, but commerce. The youths had not been adopted or even traditionally indentured. They were sold as cheap labor to Protestant families who wanted to avoid paying adult wages. The deals were cloaked in religious language, but the large sums made it clear that a human trafficking ring was operating under the veil of the Sisters of Mercy. This knowledge haunted her through the long, dark months. She was caught between her vow of holy obedience and her duty to the orphans. 8 lives had already been bartered away. The previous summer had been her charge, and she felt she had failed those little ones completely. Their innocence had been sold out, not by some external threat, but by the very sanctuary that had sworn to protect them. Mother O'Malley appeared truly oblivious to the dark reality of Father Brennan's deals. She spoke glowingly of the home's newfound wealth and lauded the priest for his talent in securing futures for the older wards. When Sister Agnes attempted to voice her alarms regarding the total lack of mail from the departed children, the Mother Superior brushed them aside, suggesting that Protestant households likely forbid their laborers from contacting Catholic homes. "Those youths are forging new paths," she stated with conviction. "We must have faith that Providence has led them to their destiny, and our duty is to care for the ones still under this roof." Yet Father Brennan was already plotting to scale his enterprise. With the coming of spring, he began conducting what he labeled competency reviews, gauging each child's physical health, manual aptitude, and obedience. He focused his gaze on the recent arrivals from Philadelphia, strangers who lacked deep ties within the orphanage and whose exit would be less likely to spark an outcry among the group. The priest had also begun networking with a wider circle of Protestant families across Lancaster and its neighbors. The success of his early transactions had drummed up a high demand for labor, and the looming planting season meant he could command even steeper prices for sturdy, compliant children. Brennan even mused about broadening his reach to other Catholic homes in Pennsylvania, envisioning a regional placement hub that would fatten the coffers of multiple institutions while satisfying the hunger of the Protestant farm belt for cheap hands. Sister Agnes understood that she was watching the foundation of a methodical slave trade, one that preyed upon the desperation of holy houses and the biases of wealthy landowners. The orphanages were starving for cash, and the farmers wanted workers who cost less than grown men. Father Brennan had engineered a way to harvest profit from both sides while keeping a mask of religious duty. The mental toll on the remaining orphans was quiet but devastating. They had observed that the big kids who left for placements never sent letters or returned to visit, a sharp change from the past. Fears whispered in the dark of the sleeping quarters revealed a growing terror. The children began to view their teen years not as a step toward freedom, but as the countdown to their own disappearance. 10-year-old Mary Catherine Donovan, who had been inseparable from Margaret Connolly, was plagued by night terrors of being snatched by faceless men. She would wake the dormitory with her screams, sobbing for Margaret and begging the nuns to hide her from the Protestant buyers. As Agnes tried to soothe her, the girl gripped her habit and asked the one question Agnes couldn't answer. "They aren't ever coming back, are they? None of them?" That question gnawed at Agnes because she knew the girl was right. These children weren't being apprenticed for a better life. They were being devoured by a machine that saw them as tools rather than souls. Once they entered that pipeline, they were effectively erased as human beings. As the winter frost gave way to the first buds in the garden, Agnes made a choice that would eventually tear the mask off Brennan's scheme. She started a clandestine journal of every placement, recording names, ages, looks, and the families who supposedly took them. She also began quietly asking the new arrivals from the city if they had siblings or friends in other nearby Catholic homes. Her findings confirmed her darkest intuition. The missing children of Sacred Heart were just a small part of a vast web of trafficking that spanned the state. In March 1863, during the height of the Civil War's carnage, an unexpected arrival threatened Brennan's empire. Bishop Francis Kendrick of Philadelphia arrived without warning, ostensibly for a routine checkup on rural ministries. However, Agnes saw immediately that this was no casual visit. Kendrick was a stern, brilliant administrator who climbed the ranks through a mix of deep theology and sharp management. He had been hearing murmurs from across the state, reports of children vanishing from schools and homes without a paper trail, alongside suspicious financial surges in those same institutions. The trend was too blatant to ignore, and he had come to see the truth for himself. Brennan welcomed the bishop with theatrical politeness, showing off the shiny new facilities and praising the sisters for their hard work. He presented his financial books with pride, arguing that his forward-thinking placement model had turned a dying home into a portrait of success. Kendrick listened in silence, his cold gaze missing nothing. But when the bishop demanded the specific contracts for the children sent to local farms, Brennan's mask slipped. He claimed the files were locked away in Lancaster and couldn't be reached until the next week. He promised to fetch them, but Kendrick insisted on seeing them before he left the following morning. That night, as Brennan worked feverishly to forge the missing papers, Agnes found the courage to act. She sought a private word with Kendrick. The bishop, who knew the look of a corrupt institution when he saw one, agreed to the secret meeting. In the dim light of the library, lit by a single lamp, Agnes laid out the entire horror of the operation. She handed over her secret log of the missing and recounted the denial from Mrs. Hoffman. She detailed her conviction that they were running a slave trade behind a curtain of charity. Kendrick listened in a heavy silence. When she finished, he sat for a long time, processing the rot. Finally, he spoke with the weight of the church behind him. "Sister Agnes, what you have described is a stain upon this diocese. If you are right, Father Brennan has betrayed his vows and broken the law of the land. Understand this. Exposing this will likely shut down Sacred Heart and scar the church's name in the state forever. Are you ready for the fallout?" Sister Agnes returned the bishop's look with unwavering resolve. "Your Excellency, my vows were taken to honor God and safeguard the vulnerable. Those 14 little ones relied on our protection, and we failed them. If the price of stopping this horror is the shuttering of Sacred Heart, then I accept that as the Almighty's plan." The bishop gave a slow, solemn nod. "So be it. At dawn, I shall confront Father Brennan with these claims. You will be there as my witness, equipped with every piece of evidence you have gathered. We will uncover the truth, regardless of the repercussions." However, Father Brennan had not survived the treacherous waters of church politics without a sharp instinct for danger. He had caught wind of the private talk between Agnes and Kendrick, and he noted the way the sister pointedly looked away during Vespers. That night, while the home lay in slumber, Brennan gathered his vital papers and all the cash he could carry, vanishing into the rural Pennsylvania night. By daybreak, the priest was gone, along with nearly $300 from the home safe and every shred of evidence regarding his placements. He left only a hurried note claiming he had been summoned to serve as a chaplain at the battlefront. He said nothing of the orphans or the buyers. Bishop Kendrick was incensed by the escape, but found in it the final proof he needed. Brennan's flight was an unspoken admission of guilt, allowing the bishop to pivot from suspicion to a full-scale hunt for the truth. He sent out agents to track down the victims and began probing other homes for similar rot. Over the following weeks, they unmasked a corrupt web that had exploited scores of youths across several counties. Brennan had been collaborating with at least 3 other clerics, building a client list of wealthy Protestant families throughout the southeast of the state. The racket had pulled in thousands of dollars in illicit blood money while forcing defenseless children into lives of silent, unpaid toil. Yet the search turned up something even more sickening. A number of the children were nowhere to be found. Some buyers had moved out of state, taking their servants with them and leaving no trail. Other families callously claimed the children had simply bolted or succumbed to fever, though they had no proof of burial or illness. The trail for at least 6 of them, including Timothy Walsh and Margaret Connolly, had gone cold. This realization shifted Kendrick's probe from a church audit into a major criminal hunt involving state and federal law. The bishop knew that if children were being trafficked across state lines, it had become a federal matter of kidnapping and illegal commerce. In April 1863, as the search widened, Agnes was visited by someone who would provide the first true lead. Jacob Stoltzfus, a young Mennonite farmer, arrived at the orphanage looking deeply shaken. He had heard the whispers of the probe and felt a moral duty to share what he knew. Stoltzfus explained that Father Brennan had approached his family the year before about taking a Catholic ward for farm labor. The Mennonites, as pacifists, had stayed neutral in the war, but they were suffering from a lack of help as their young men fled to avoid the draft. While Jacob's father had been tempted by the offer, he eventually turned it down because the deal felt contrary to their beliefs regarding fair treatment. However, Jacob knew of other families in his circle who had taken the children, and he was sickened by what he heard. The Mennonite community was tight-knit, yet rumors were spreading about neighbors who were working orphans like beasts of burden and cutting them off from the world. "There is a family nearby, the Yoders," Stoltzfus told Agnes and the bishop. "They took a boy and a girl from your priest last summer, red-haired Irish siblings. The boy is about 14, the girl around 12. They labor from first light until dark and sleep in a shack behind the barn. My wife has seen them by the stream, and she says they look terrified of their own shadows." Kendrick immediately sent 2 agents to the Yoder estate. The scene they found was a nightmare realized. The Yoders had indeed bought 2 siblings from Brennan, Sean McMahon and his sister Ellen, who was only 11 when she was taken. Their living conditions were barely fit for animals. They slept on cold straw in a drafty shed, worked 16-hour shifts for no pay, and were forbidden from speaking to outsiders. They had been lied to, told that Sacred Heart had burned down and all the nuns were dead, leaving them with no hope of rescue. The Yoders had also cowed them with threats of the Union Army, claiming Irish Catholics were viewed as traitors who would be executed if they tried to run. Finding Sean and Ellen was the first physical proof of the slave trade, but it sparked new terrors. If the Yoders were this cruel, what was happening to the children sold to men with even less oversight? The search grew even more desperate when Kendrick received a letter from the Diocese of Baltimore detailing similar vanishings in Maryland. It described a network of religious officials selling children to Protestant families across the mid-Atlantic, with some being sent as far south as the Carolinas. The rot was deeper than anyone guessed. Brennan was just one gear in a massive, regional machine of human trafficking. As federal agents delved deeper, they unearthed a complex criminal organization that had functioned for at least 2 years. The participants had refined a method for picking out vulnerable youths, forging official papers, and transporting them over state boundaries to households willing to pay top dollar for laborers they could dominate entirely. This enterprise had amassed tens of thousands of dollars in revenue while forcing hundreds of minors into lives of bondage. However, the most sickening find occurred at a farm in Chester County, where 3 former residents of the home were found dead under mysterious circumstances. The landowner argued that a winter fever in late 1862 had taken them, but an autopsy by the local medical examiner proved they had suffered from extreme starvation and physical violence. The youths had been put in secret, unmarked pits behind a barn, with their passing hidden from both the law and the church. Samuel Crawford, a wealthy grain merchant, at first claimed he knew nothing of the cause of death. Yet, when faced with medical proof and the threat of a murder trial, he buckled and spoke the truth. He confessed to buying the trio from the priest for $200, planning to extract free labor from them until they reached adulthood. However, the children were already frail from the orphanage and could not survive the brutal farm conditions. Crawford claimed he tried to help when they fell ill, but avoided calling a physician because he feared being caught with purchased children. By the time he realized they were dying, it was too late. To avoid a scandal, he buried them in secret and erased any sign they had ever been there. This discovery of the dead children fundamentally changed the public's view of the case, turning a story of financial corruption into one of systematic torture and homicide. News outlets across the state demanded the immediate capture of everyone involved, and the government faced immense pressure to launch a full federal inquiry. Just as the public thought the nightmare had reached its peak, the investigation plunged even deeper. If this account is chilling to you, share it with someone who appreciates true mysteries and hit the like button to support us. Let's look at what happened when federal law finally caught up with the priest and unmasked the full width of his crimes. Marshals tracked down Michael Brennan in October 1863 at a Union military camp near Gettysburg, where he was posing as a chaplain using a fake identity. He had grown facial hair and claimed to be a priest from Boston, but his specific local accent and liturgical habits eventually gave him away. Initially, he maintained he was actually helping both the church and the Protestant farmers, but the evidence was undeniable. Authorities proved at least 47 children had been trafficked through his web across several states. They also found bank records showing that the group had pocketed over $15,000, a massive fortune that most people of that era would not see in an entire lifetime. Under harsh questioning, the priest finally admitted to the entire scheme. He confessed that the network was his own invention, sparked by seeing how much money wealthy landowners would pay for workers who had no rights. He had tricked other clerics into the ring by claiming the blood money would save their failing schools and homes during the war. With a cold, clinical tone, he explained how they picked the victims. Older children were premium because they could do heavy field work, while younger ones were marketed as house help. He specifically chose those with no living kin or friends, as their disappearance would go unnoticed. He callously argued that these children had no future anyway and would have died in the slums. By selling them, he claimed they served a useful purpose for the church. His confession led to the rescue of 11 more children across 3 states, but 6, including Timothy, were never found. Some had been taken to Western territories beyond the reach of the law, while others vanished, under the care of families who claimed they ran away but offered no proof. Even more horrifying was the discovery that some children weren't even used for labor. 3 were kept as housebound servants for a rich merchant, and 2 were sold to a Virginia plantation to work alongside enslaved people, placed in a reality indistinguishable from chattel slavery. The investigation uncovered the sickening truth that several youths were bartered for reasons far darker than mere physical labor. Federal agents found proof that at least 3 minors were handed over to buyers specifically hunting for young attendants for what the paperwork vaguely labeled personal duties. The official reports, locked away by judicial decree and hidden for more than a century, implied that some of the vanished children were sold into a life of sexual bondage. The sheer scale of father depravity was exposed when realized the priest had organized a literal catalog for human trafficking. He kept meticulous files on every available child, documenting their ages, appearances, manual skills, and temperaments. Potential buyers were invited to browse these records and pick out specific children who fit their requirements, with the costs fluctuating based on the child's physical health and perceived utility. Mother Superior, when presented with the evidence of the atrocities occurring under her watch, suffered a total psychological breakdown. She had truly believed was placing the orphans in nurturing homes. The realization that she had been an accidental partner in a trafficking ring shattered her mind and spirit. Stripped of her rank, she spent her final years in a secluded infirmary, never again able to speak clearly about her leadership at Sacred Heart. Sister, despite her role in breaking the case, was haunted by the weight of her own delay. She had sensed the rot from the start, but her training in holy obedience had paralyzed her until many of the children were beyond saving. She departed from the orphanage after the inquiry ended, moving south to work with liberated slaves, hoping to find some measure of atonement by serving other survivors of human commerce. The prosecution of Father and his circle became one of the era's most notorious courtroom dramas. The federal attorney indicted them under recent statutes against the interstate trade of humans, arguing their actions mirrored the very slave industry the union was currently fighting to destroy. The defense tried to frame the suspects as well-meaning clerics who were simply trying to give orphans a better shot at life. However, the proof of cold-blooded exploitation was undeniable. During the trial, the words of the rescued children laid bare the agony they had survived. The boy saved from the estate, that he was forced into 18-hour shifts during the reaping and was lashed with leather whenever his body failed him. Ellen recounted sleeping in a freezing shack through the winter, often waking to find frost clinging to her threadbare blanket. Other youths spoke of being banned from speaking their native tongue, ignored when they were sick, and threatened with death if they tried to reach the sisters. The testimony that most affected the jury came from 12-year-old Bridget, who had been sold into Maryland. Bridget described being treated as a domestic drudge from sunrise until midnight, sleeping on a hard kitchen floor and surviving on meager scraps. When she attempted to flee, she was caught and padlocked in a root cellar for 3 days without a drop of water. The buyers had told their neighbors she was a simple-minded relative who needed constant confinement, a lie that prevented anyone from questioning her misery. Throughout the trial, Father showed no remorse. Given the chance to speak before his sentence, he gave a long-winded defense, insisting his actions were vital for the church's survival during the war. He argued the Protestant buyers offered a life of useful work and Christian guidance that no orphanage could match. He claimed his only sorrow was that he hadn't helped more children leave the system. The jury required less than 2 hours to find them guilty on all counts, was handed a 20-year sentence in federal prison, while his accomplices received between 5 and 15 years. The judge, in his closing remarks, called their crimes a violation of everything society holds dear, expressing a particular fury at their use of holy titles to facilitate such a disgusting form of slavery. Sacred Heart never moved past the infamy. The Diocese of Philadelphia shuttered the home in 1864, moving the remaining orphans to other facilities across the state. The property was sold to a Protestant group for use as a seminary, but that project also collapsed within a few years. Local legends claim the building was tainted, with bizarre accidents plaguing anyone who tried to restart a school there. For decades, investigators stayed on the hunt for the 6 children who were never recovered. Timothy, the red-haired boy who was the first to be sold, was reportedly spotted on an Ohio farm in 1867, but the family fled before the law arrived. The linguistically gifted girl was allegedly seen as a maid in a wealthy Virginia manor, but she too vanished before she could be rescued. The final 4, Murphy, Bridget, and 2 youths whose names had obscured, dissolved into the vast landscape of post-war America. They may have been traded from house to house, their names stripped away and their pasts deleted. They may have died from the toil and the belt, buried in nameless graves. Or they may have reached adulthood, forever carrying the ghost of their stolen childhood, unable to find their way back to a world that had betrayed them. The mental scars on the rescued were deep. Many suffered from what is now known as PTSD, struggling with night terrors and an inability to trust anyone in a position of power. Several ran away from their new placements, choosing the uncertainty of the streets over the risk of being bartered by another religious authority. The infamy also had enduring consequences for Catholic and Protestant relations across Pennsylvania and throughout the United States. Protestant groups that had long harbored doubts about Catholic organizations now possessed undeniable proof to validate their anxieties regarding papal corruption and foreign meddling. Catholic authorities, meanwhile, fought an uphill battle to regain the confidence of their parishioners and the general American public. The scandal became a central pillar for anti-Catholic rhetoric that persisted well into the 20th century. Government officials utilized the Sacred Heart case to demand greater oversight of faith-based organizations and more rigorous application of laws protecting children in group homes. New mandates required thorough records of every placement and ordered frequent check-ins on households that took in wards from orphanages. While these changes helped thwart further massive trafficking schemes, they arrived too late for the 14 youths who had already vanished from the home. The mystery of their fates continued to weigh on the men who had cracked the case. Federal Marshal James, the lead investigator, spent years chasing ghosts and rumors, but he never uncovered a single piece of hard evidence regarding where they ended up. In his 1870 closing brief, noted, "The path of these innocents has turned cold, and I am afraid the truth of their end may be lost to time. They were swallowed by a machine that prized their sweat more than their souls, and they were the ones who paid for our inability to shield them." The clandestine logs kept by Sister Agnes, which proved vital in unmasking the plot, were kept by the Philadelphia Diocese before eventually being moved to the Pennsylvania State Archives. Scholars who studied these papers years later were moved by the deep precision she used to record every child's name, age, and unique traits. Her observations revealed a woman who truly cherished the orphans and was tortured by her failure to protect them from the trade. The most heartbreaking note in her records was the one next to Timothy Walsh: red hair, freckled skin, scar on the left palm from a kitchen slip, wishes to be a teacher, terrified of storms. Last seen June 15, 1862. May the Lord have mercy on us. Similar intimate details followed every name, painting a picture of real human beings who had been turned into mere inventory in Brennan's network. The brick building that served as Sacred Heart stood vacant for nearly 10 years after the scandal broke. Neighbors spoke of strange lights in the upper windows at night, and the muffled sounds of children's laughter echoing from the hollow rooms. Whether these were ghostly echoes or just the product of collective guilt and trauma, They remained a constant reminder of the horror that occurred within. In 1874, the structure was finally torn down by new owners who argued it was structurally compromised and a risk to the public. However, the locals knew the truth. The building was a monument to a shame that no one wanted to look at anymore. The bricks were carted away and repurposed for a new courthouse in Lancaster, where they ironically still support the halls of justice today. The site of the former orphanage was eventually turned into a public graveyard, and a modest stone was placed there in 1925 to honor the children who were used and lost. The text simply says, "In memory of the blameless children who suffered here, may they find in the grave the peace they were denied in life." Even this small gesture was met with pushback from residents who felt it was better to let the tragedy be forgotten entirely. Father Brennan served 18 years of his two-decade sentence before passing away in a federal cell in 1881. His death was officially blamed on pneumonia, though prison logs hint at a long decline into melancholia, a state that might suggest he finally understood the weight of his sins. He was interred in a nameless pit in the prison yard, his identity erased from all commemorative records. The other clerics in the ring faced varying jail times, but all suffered the ultimate church punishment of being defrocked. Several hunts were organized to find the families who had bought the children, but many had trekked to the Western territories where federal law was weak. The youth sold to these buyers simply dissolved into the expanding American frontier, their lives forever a mystery. The Sacred Heart infamy ultimately forced major changes in how religious charities operated in the U.S. New statutes required state inspections of orphanages, and strict paperwork was forced upon every placement deal. These shifts helped stop similar trafficking rings, but it came at the cost of the complete independence these charities once enjoyed. Perhaps the most permanent lesson of the tragedy was the realization that institutional power, be it holy or secular, cannot be blindly trusted with the lives of the weak. The case proved that even prominent religious leaders could commit the most monstrous acts when ambition is fueled by power and prejudice. The 14 who vanished were caught in a perfect storm of wartime panic, religious hate, and greed. Their personal lives were erased by the larger story of the nation's growth, but their shared tragedy stands as a warning of what happens when we fail to protect our most vulnerable. This mystery teaches us that our most revered systems can hide the darkest rot. What is your view on this? Do you think the whole truth was told, or are there more secrets in those hills? Tell us in the comments if you think any of them survived under new names. If you want more stories on the hidden secrets of our past, subscribe and hit the bell. The truth is always darker than we think, and there are many more stories waiting to be unmasked.